Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The first item on the work session is the Maryland Theater funding request. Jessica and Benito, come on up. Come on down. No, so come on down.
Yeah, here's our Robbie.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Well, first of all, thank you for the chance to come and be the council. I appreciate your time. And I was thinking a little while back how many times we've sat here over the last so many years, and it was initially just we'd like to do, and now we look at an amazing design that actually we can look down the street and we're actually framed out, which I remember when it was knocked down, I realized, is that all we had to do is knock the building down? And we're here today.
Sorry.
So I'm really excited to, what we have really, when you think about it, is an amazing complex, performing arts complex in front of us. That when residents or people come visit, they're going to visit a facility that they're going to be welcomed into. It's going to be very elegant. There's going to be a lot of activity, and we feel it will actually double capacity over the next couple of years of people throughput. So the construction of the arts complex really is going to provide an additional 6 rental spaces. And I was sharing earlier that we're already beginning to get inclinations and really people that want to not only rent not the Maryland Theater for performance, but an event afterwards in the event space. We see opportunity not only to continue to see the theater perform well, but the event space itself to be filled up, and that means more people downtown over the days and so forth. It's going to really, the real vision behind this project, not only to fulfill a vision that our community's had for many years, what really, as a business, was to develop a revenue stream, a sustainable revenue stream. We do well at the Maryland Theater itself for the performances. We're actually in the black. We're doing very well from that perspective, but there's not a lot of margin after a show. Having this extra complex really allows us to have a sustainable business revenue that is going to supplement a very well-run theater. And that really is a long-term. Our hope is that the theater will always be self-sustaining, and it's the event space that you've been so generous to be part of over the years, not only through support, but donations and giving from the council have really helped us create this. Jessica, at this time, is going to go ahead and give a little bit of update in the details.
Am I in control of this? Okay, all right, that's the one that Benito went over. So here I just wanted to give a schedule update on our construction. We're over 50% of the way through the timeline. I know it doesn't seem like it when you're just seeing structural steel out there, but the mechanical contractors, electrical, framing are coming up right up behind the steel. So we're framing through the 3rd floor at this point. 4th floor, I think that says this week. We were unsure when I had to turn in this presentation, so it was actually placed last week, the 4th floor, and we just today confirmed our topping out date for April 9th at 2 p.m. I haven't even told Benito that. It was just in the last meeting, so everybody saved the date for that. We'll continue this Phase 2 occupied construction for about another 100 days through the end of June, at which point we will close and go into a dark period as far as the performance schedule is concerned for the last 90 days through October. And at that point, by the end of the summer, the expansion should actually be almost completed, and the last several weeks will really be the connection points of the two, the historic and the expansion. And of course, save the date for October 11th, which you should have already seen a save the date. Next slide is really a financial update. Our total project budget really hasn't changed, $15 million. That includes everything from design, fundraising, construction, all the way to furniture and equipment. And here we just go down the different amounts that from our different funding sources. County has pledged $1 million to construction and then up to $500,000 for design. County has also provided the in-kind inspection services, which has been wonderful to have that gentleman on site each and every day. City here, we have the $200,000 that you provided last fiscal year for construction, and then up to the $500,000 for design. So it end up being a little bit less because I don't think our design will quite reach $1 million total. At this point, pledges signed are just over 4.8. We have the $5 million from Governor Hogan and 2 grants from DHCD that we've been working with Kathy Marr on for $600,000. And I know there's been some communication that there may be a couple $100,000 more from DHCD. And then our state bond bills of $450,000. We are anticipating an additional up to $1 million from county funding. We're working through that with county staff, and an ARC grant of potentially up to $250,000. So our gap right now is 1.9. If we would get the 1 million from county and the ARC grant, you can see it's significantly reduced. So why are we here today? First off, we want to thank Mayor and Council for approving the $200,000 in construction funding last year with Valerie Means and Michelle Hepburn working with the theater. I know last year you initially considered a 4-year pledge with $200,000 the first year in FY19 and then $100,000 in each of the next 3 fiscal years. So today we are back to request your consideration for that $100,000 totaling to get us to that total of $500,000 in construction funding from the city. And really, we're open to city budget needs as far as how or when that comes, but we would just really like to request the total $500,000 that our finance team had considered and understood, and we'd like your continued support on the construction project. And I guess I can just echo what Benito had said before. A variety of events are already being worked on for these new spaces from 2019 and beyond. I think we're up to over 10 contracts that are already signed through 2023. Last week we met with an international conference that is considering renting the entire facility for 4.5 days. So pretty exciting, and we have a lot of interest. And last but not least, just wanted to go through the thank yous again because they are so, so important. Each and every day we are working with city staff, and I don't want to neglect that fact. So countless hours with city staff for the overall UIP and the Maryland Theater. The fire marshal and the fire chief continue to play big roles for us in staying operational during the occupied construction. Planning and guidance with city engineers, planning and code staff, Kathy Marr, Paul Folk, Rodney Tissue, Blaine Moen, Pam Harris is on site every day, so there's many, many people out there. Direction and approval from HDC and zoning committees and staff. Just talked to Steve Bachmiller again last week. He's just checking in with us and making sure that we're going through the proper motions to have the HDC continued approval. And of course, we did have the city administrator service on the Maryland Theater Board of Directors, and we hope to continue that once a new administrator is selected. So supervision from the city financial staff, Jason and Michelle continue to be very helpful. And then, of course, your support and advocacy from Mayor and Council, we really appreciate it. So.
You know, and one thing I'd just like to say, while we're here as Maryland Theater Organization asking for the support, everything that we've done from several years back when we start restructuring how the theater operated was to partner throughout our community. And I think, and I'm going to go off my cuff here, just saying, over 20 local arts organizations in Washington County participate throughout the year in Maryland theaters. That's 67% of our revenue or performance days are allotted to local arts. Mm-hmm. So when the Maryland Theater speaks about where we're going and where we're headed, it's always been about opening our venue to be a place where the arts of Washington County can come together. And it starts from the school system all the way to community concerts and other events that come into the theater and perform downtown. And so everything we're doing is all about partnerships where we're reaching out through other parts of Washington County to see how the Maryland Theater can help the arts councils and outside of, not our area here, but outside throughout Washington County. Mm-hmm. So everything we're doing, I just want to say thank you because the support that we've been given has allowed us the space to really restructure about how we're going to go out our business. So the venue that we have really is going to really touch are many generations of our community, and that's really how we've designed the business moving forward. It's a partnership for everyone.
Well, Kristen, you want to say something?
I mean, I don't know if what you're looking for this evening from any one of us is a yes, but I mean, I don't have any objection to the request at $100,000 a year for the remaining term. I mean, I think, quite frankly, you know, you look at the overall $50 million investment in that, and then you look at that amount of funding, and I continue to believe that between the education expansion and the arts expansion downtown, we're going to make that type of funding back in new tax proceeds. So if we don't invest in things like that, you know, that are productive and economic drivers for the core, then we're not going to have that tax benefit. So that's just me.
And I would be the second to what Kristen has to say. And I would only note that this body worked for how many hours, Mayor, on trying to get a downtown stadium here. And as everyone knows about my support for that effort, it was based upon improvements and enhancements to downtown. And unfortunately, when that fell through, it didn't fall through that we should not continue to support enhancing and improving downtown. And quite candidly, this is a much less expensive and I think a fantastic use of our funds for the citizens. And thank you for everything.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed this is going to be the focal point of downtown, the focal point of our economic redevelopment effort, and we all want to see it succeed. And basically, all you're asking for is that we honor the pledge we made. So, I mean, that's nice. You're not asking for anything else.
Thanks for not asking for more.
No, I think when Valerie and Michelle presented last year to you, you were uncomfortable approving the full 4-year plan, and you just approved the first year of funding. So what we're asking is for the remaining 3 years.
That's before we saw the steel beams and.
Oh, now it's exciting and it's happening.
Yeah, now we believe you.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Well, I'll maintain my position that, given the catalyst projects that we talked about with Urban Partners and the amount of money that we would have to expend to do a conference center alone, this little investment that we're doing at the Maryland Theater more than makes up for that. It allows us the time needed to build up those customers who would need a conference center in the magnitude that we've talked about before. So I think this is just that stepping stone that'll bring those conferences in to the Maryland Theater to be able to, you know, add feet to the street and do the things we want to do. So 100% behind it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, guys.
We've been cutting out 11th, right?
Thank God Michelle's not here tonight, huh?
We'll be there.
Yeah, we can all talk about that. She's twitching so bad.
Hope she's not watching.
Yeah, sorry, Michelle.
All right, next up is the Community Action Council Goodwill Housing Discussion.
Thank you, Donna.
So we're finally here. We're finally here.
Yeah,
Email
right?
exchanges.
I'm sorry?
There's a lot of email exchanges to get you.
It was a lot of emails. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you guys for taking us off of the internet and making us live today after all of those email exchanges. What we prepared for all of you was just some basic information about where we are today in opportunity, not for, I want to be really clear that we're not talking about homelessness today, but we're really talking about those ALICE households that we're serving from a workforce development perspective, that the CAC might be seeing for crisis assistance, and the gaps there are for those families or those individuals who are working, who still are finding themselves struggling to survive. So there's some information. Ted is not a real human, I will tell you that. He is just a kind of a compilation of a number of people that we see. But so on the first page there, you actually have our current Washington County, hot off the presses from 8 a.m. this morning, community health ranking. Our county is number 17 in the state, so close to the bottom. And those health rankings, as you get to the back, you'll actually see the findings and then recommendations of what works beyond that. Because when our health measurements are being ranked, it's not just about the physical wellness of the people that live in our community, but their emotional wellness, their financial wellness, and how that impacts Washington County as a whole. So a little bit of all of that information there. So Ted was kind of a fictional character, but the baseline of who we see in general. And what we were hoping to start a dialogue about today and maybe walk away with some action steps of how do we support TED in moving forward. I wanted to provide some kind of background for you too, that as the minimum wage has risen, you may or may not know that thresholds for supports like food stamps or Medicaid have not. So now a person who works full-time earning minimum wage is no longer eligible for food stamp benefits, and they are also not eligible for Medicaid without purchasing it. So any income increase they have seen immediately goes away with the need to pay those benefits, right? Which then still puts them in a situation where renting an apartment for even $600 or $700 a month puts them in the negative at the end of every month. So we're just wanting to kind of explore ideas of how we offset that. We are working really hard at Goodwill to get people upskilled, right? We also know that folks can't necessarily take 6 months, a year out of their life to go to school because they're adults and they have children and they have other responsibilities. So providing access to credentialings that can happen in 2 or 3 weeks, 4 or 5 days that will increase their earning potential. But at the same time, we would love to see people be willing to commit to those longer term programs, but we have to help them find relief or alternatives, right, to support that. If I'm a mom and I want to go be an LPN, but I can't pay for daycare, how can I go be an LPN? You know, so we're not asking the council for money, but just to kind of join us in that conversation.
And really, I mean, we would like to see from this is a partnership between the city, eventually the county, the state as well, to address this housing issue. It's the working poor, it's the folks that are trying to be self-sufficient, but just need a little bit of assistance in the beginning to get going. Just last year, we had 87 evictions that we prevented at CEC with funding that we had. This is something we'd like to see decrease, and that's only going to happen if we're able to provide affordable housing to get these people started, have them there for a couple years until they're self-sufficient and can move on. Again, as Brooke mentioned, we're not talking about the homeless population. We're talking about a completely different demographic here that has a different set of needs.
And offering an opportunity for them for accountability, right? Those of you that have talked to me know that I will say all of the time about a job. Getting a job really isn't the hard part, right? It's maintaining it. It's all of those things that come after. And on some level, so is an apartment, right? So is a place to stay. Getting it is a challenge, but it's not the end game. And that's where we find that kind of accountability piece for folks kind of stops now, right? Maybe they were working with a crisis assistance program or somebody to give them that leg up. They got their security deposit paid, and now they're on their own again, right? And that is then when we see people kind of fall off and cycle away. It's the same time that we would see someone kind of in that old model, and still some places, right? You got the job, great, high five, see you later, good luck. It doesn't work that way because you get that first paycheck, you don't know how to balance it, you don't know how to kind of prioritize your needs, you don't have that support when your mom and you have a fight and says, I'm not going to babysit for you anymore, but you're still trying to figure out how I'm going to make life work. So that accountability piece, I think, really comes into housing for that population as well, and support. They need that. They need extra support. They need someone to help them truly walk through this process so they can become self-sustaining. We kind of get everybody to the water, so to speak, and then we walk away and say, go ahead and drink, but we don't think about what comes beyond that. It takes, kind of studies have shown, from poverty to self-sufficiency, 7 solid years of work. It's not just one job and all of a sudden life is going to change. So we're kind of coming and wanting to talk in partnership of how we work together to build a system that supports that. We know we can't change federal guidelines and those kinds of things, but what can we do as a community to support that population differently? Because if we do, right, then that's an economic engine for us. That's a group of people who may be able to buy homes in 3 or 4 or 5 years, who are parents who can spend time with their kids and make sure they're ready for kindergarten, who are doing homework, you know, on the weekends, those types of things that they're struggling to be able to do now because they can't balance their workload and their life load.
I will take a step back for just a second because I may not be familiar to all of you yet, but I'm David Schuster with Goodwill as well. And I just want to share a couple of very brief comments related to some of the information that's in front of you. And to us at Goodwill, as Brooke said, you know, we are in the business of helping folks to get to their fullest potential. Right? Fullest potential is not being Ted, struggling to make all things meet at $11 an hour, having to make choices about whether you're going to get to work or you're going to pay for your medication or you're going to pay for your rent or your electricity. It is about doing everything we can collectively as a group to support those individuals' opportunity to advance themselves, to get to a place where they are sustainable and they are now contributing both as members of the workforce but also as economic contributors to the community in which they live. Much of the data that you will see in the back of that is from a group called County Health Rankings and Roadmaps, which, if you're not familiar with them, is actually a nationwide project that is also the foundational data that the Meritus folks use for the community health assessment that they conduct. If you've heard Alan present that information, the first several slides in that presentation actually are from County Health Rankings and Roadmaps. That's where they get a predominant amount of their data. And what is interesting is that they look at the entire social determinant picture of health. And so while health may not be something you would expect the three of us to be sitting here talking about, what it highlights is the interconnectedness of every one of these challenges and barriers that folks face to being successful. And so if you cannot afford where you live and you do not have the opportunity to improve your job skills and your wages, then you're also making choices about your health that are now impacting yet another side of the service of services, where you're now tapping into medical services, and you've got those sorts of issues, and you're now also finding yourself essentially making unhealthy choices either out of necessity for cost or other things. So they are all interconnected, and what they find in here is that when you have to spend a disproportionate amount of your income on housing, you end up in this position where not only do you not have the opportunity to get job skills, but your health now is likely to suffer as well, and as a result, the health of the community in general suffers as well, which is why we thought that was also, sort of a relevant, even broader scope picture to share that you can take a look at when we're done here.
Well, I think it sounds like it's a much broader problem than a city problem. This is a state, county, city issue, and it's something we need input from those parties also, because it's not anything we can do alone here.
I think some of, in my opinion, we'll find the most success with those entities if we kind of locally develop some potential ideas for how to address those problems and throw them out to them as options, right? And give them a menu of options. We could do option A, option B, option C. Which would you be most in support of? I don't know that we will find much success if we just present a problem to them as well, my opinion.
So do you have if you had
Right.
the perfect solution? I mean, I think earlier you said, do you have ideas? I know that there's many other municipalities across the country that come up with some pretty creative things. You had mentioned that you're not coming to ask for us for money, but
No.
a partnership. So
We
what
are.
is the
So-
free solution?
So we recognize, right, that when we talk about housing, we all do this, right? Especially if it's housing with supports or those kinds of things. I get it. I do that too. But one of our potential ideas, or kind of one of the places that we had looked, is Goodwill in Indianapolis has worked to develop an affordable housing kind of program community for folks that are going through their job training programs, right? So you're coming in, you are maybe one of those disconnected youth in the community who's never worked, who really is going to have to start in entry-level work and work your way up, right? But there is an affordable housing solution for them that they are able to move into an apartment that maybe for 12 months is gonna cost them $300 a month, and then as they grow their income, right, their investment back into where they're staying increases. But by having a rent that is affordable to them, and then staff that are assigned to work with them to continue their workforce programs and be their case manager and kind of their life coach, if you will, right? It ensures that their participation in that program is based upon and their follow-through of the expectations of them, but it also provides them the time and the money and the sense of mind, or I guess peace of mind, if you will, right, that I can take on these other opportunities. I can go to college because I don't have to work 3 jobs just to be able to pay my rent. I know that as long as I work the 22 hours I'm scheduled every week, that I can commit those other, 10 or 12 hours a week to classes somewhere else. Maybe it's my CDL class that's on Friday and Saturday, and I have a person that's working with me to advocate with my employer, to make sure that I'm going to school, to make sure that I am following kind of the expectations of my housing program, and to be helping to build me up, right? Program is a strong word, but it's the accountability piece that comes along with that, that we don't see in other housing projects now, and that's not right or wrong, that's just the way that they are structured. I think that if you start to think again that from day one to self-sufficiency is 7 solid years, it's, again, kind of unrealistic to not put all of those things together for someone, to not say that, if you live here, this is what is expected of you. I know a lease does that to a certain extent, but not really, right? The lease just expects that you pay your rent, that you don't get in trouble, and, that's it. This, what I'm really talking about, is that you are going to have to do, and some of us have talked about this already, you're going to have to see your case manager once a week. You're going to have to go to work when you are scheduled to go. You're going to have to pay your rent on time. You're going to have to participate in financial education classes. You're going to have to do all of those things. Those are expectations of being here. This isn't a right, it's a responsibility, right? And it's an opportunity to grow. But it also provides that reprieve on the other side for the person that chooses to take that opportunity to grow, right? To take advantage of going to the construction school, which also then when they finish that, they come out as someone who can earn $17, $18, $19 an hour, not someone that's gonna be constantly stuck in the rut of entry-level work, right? And even as minimum wage goes up, we know, you can see on page 2, for a single person, it's an $18 about an hour wage that is a sustainable wage in Washington County, not a $15 minimum wage.
So, we have a perception, whether real or not, of that Hagerstown and Washington County has all of the resources. We have every single thing you could need. Washington ships their people here because they can come get, X, Y, and Z, but yet we still have gaps, clearly as identified with the issues that we have. So I'm just curious as to what you see those gaps are, if we have all of these resources, why are the gaps? And also, you mentioned it earlier, we know it's a very real thing. Some of the organizations that are helping people like get into a house, and then it's very hands-off. And I understand, everyone's fighting for money, and the more people you get sustainable and different things like that, you get different grants. But how can we, you guys, organizations, hold that accountable? If you put 10 people into a house next week and all 10 of them are evicted within 60 days, that wasn't beneficial. So is there a way that we can oversee that, prevent that from happening, wrap services around them to ensure that that doesn't, which I know is your intention, but that may not be the intention of.
And just to be clear, as far as the services go, there's a CAC in every county or serviced by every county in the state. And we're all a little bit different, but Frederick County, they have a medical clinic attached to their CAC. So you're really better off going to Frederick than you are us. People aren't moving here for the services that we provide. I think my staff is pretty good, but they're not that good that people are relocating to get the same service. We offer the energy program. It's offered in every county in the state. People aren't moving here for those services. It's just not the case. And to speak to your point about the wrapping around of services, we have case management in place that will work with those folks and require them to check in. Barriers that they see as something they cannot overcome, with a little bit of assistance, all of a sudden they're back on track and they're doing what they need to do. So I'm confident between the partnership that we can develop with some of the agencies in town and support from the city and state and county that this can be successful.
And I think, Emily, to answer your point about gaps in resources, there is, I don't know if you've ever heard the term a benefits cliff, which is, so I get X amount of benefits if I am at this income level, right? And those benefits offset my lack of income. But as soon as I take my next step up, I lose all of those benefits, right? But going up from $9.75 an hour last year to $10.10 an hour, most single individuals that were working a minimum of 30 hours a week lost all but about $12 of their food stamps. But they weren't bringing home, right, in that pay gap, they weren't, or pay raise, they weren't bringing home an additional $200 a month to pay for food. So a raise actually cost them money in a certain sense, right? So we have this situation now where, like, you can see Ted's earning $11 an hour. It's a little more than minimum wage, but by doing that and working 40 hours a week, those benefits that become very expensive, food, healthcare, now are a burden on Ted, right? And so I'm not saying that we should encourage anyone to live off of benefits for forever, but we have to find a way to help them balance that, right? $11 an hour is not a living wage, but as soon as you hit it, you lose all of those supports, right, that could help you continue to live while you notch it up to where you get to a living wage. So there's a real disparity there. We can't change federal income limits and those kinds of things, but we could offer an opportunity where Ted's housing cost was lower that did not cause that additional burden for him, right? So his housing cost is lower. He also has, you know, Jordy's staff are good, mine are pretty good too. If somebody doesn't show up for work, my staff will go knock on their door and ask them why they're not there. What's going on? You know, and it could be that they're sick and they need to get connected to the doctor. It could be that they just overslept, but there's somebody kind of checking in, what's up? Why is this happening, right? And that doesn't exist for a lot of people in the community right now. They get a job, they go, they don't, they get fired, right? And that's the end of it. So there's a whole kind of another level of somebody there to gently support you to where you need to be, you know, kind of a bear hug / chokehold to get you where you need to be.
Emily, to also answer your specific point, your outcomes question, right? And when you hear that cycle is 7 years, right, from poverty to sustainability there, and you hear, and you recognize that getting a job is not the same thing as keeping a job. One of the issues, in my opinion, when you look at this, and this is what, to some extent, the foundation of the program idea that Brooke was sharing, is we have to change our outcome expectation, our outcome metrics. It is not simply that we put somebody back in a house. It is that we put them somewhere where they had an opportunity to get better and that to better themselves, that we check in, 90 days, 180 days, a year, and we actually have to start following that. And when you start to actually look at some of the grant funding now, that is actually a shift that they're starting to move towards transformational outcomes instead of just sort of one-touch outcomes, if that makes sense. Which is exactly what we're shifting to doing. When you hear that we will go knock on someone's door if they don't come to work, that is a much more intensive level of service to provide to individuals.
Absolutely.
But that, in many cases, is actually what it takes to help them make that 7-year transformation, and just use that window of time
It's
as an
just because
example.
they don't want me to knock
Right.
on their door.
But the point is that is part of it, and that is why to be successful with that, the idea is merging both the affordable housing piece with a program requirement that is helping them to advance further on, and that creates a much stronger, longer lasting transformational outcome for individuals than just saying that we either got you a job or we got you a place to live temporarily that may or may not work out because we didn't address some of the other barriers that you're facing. And that's the issue, again, the interconnectedness of the barriers. You cannot address one. There are multiple, and we have to have a plan, and that's where we're coming to, is collaborating to address as many of them as we can at one time to increase the chances of success, and that we're also not diluting our resources on things that will not be successful.
Absolutely.
I think the other place there needs to be focus is on the employer, on the employers in the area, because as you get into these kind of programs, as you add employees, as with the current laws and the changing laws and everything, with the number of employees for healthcare and that kind of thing, you're basically, it's not in the employer's interest to support this kind of program right now, and we need to change that.
Well, and it's also not in their interest to have full-time employees, right? A lot of employers are backing off to two part-time 20-hour people to fill a 40-hour position, so they don't have those healthcare costs associated with that position. So that also means Ted's one really lucky entry-level person, to be honest with you, because most of them don't get 40 hours a week, right? They'd be lucky to get 25 to 28. So they're trying also sometimes to piece multiple jobs together to survive.
I'll make a couple of comments, and it may be a bit all over the board to start out, but I want to get to this idea of partnership. You know, one of the sheets that I share with folks often is this comparative sheet between us and other neighboring jurisdictions, Frederick, Cumberland, Annapolis, Salisbury, even the community outside of the city limits. And it speaks to this notion that, you know, that there's a need here in the city specifically for additional housing opportunities of this nature. And I look at it as it applies to the ability of this body to continue to sustainably manage a community that is moving up and also that has the economic capability to continue to provide the services that citizens expect. And so, you know, percent of persons living at or below poverty line, Hagerstown's 22.5%. These are you know, a couple-year-old figures. But then you look at Cumberland at 17%, Frederick at 7%, Annapolis at 6%, Rockville at 6%, even outside of the city in Washington County is at 6%. So we're nearly 4 times that area just outside of the city limits. And that total population in the city is about 9,000 in these numbers. 5,000 folks in Frederick, 3,000 in Cumberland, 7,000 outside of the city. So we have more actually in total inside of the city, even though we only make up about a quarter of the total county population. A number of these other figures include total public housing authority units. In the city of Hagerstown, there's nearly 1,200. In Cumberland, there's 400. Frederick has 300. Even though they're almost twice our size, they have about a quarter of the number of housing units available through public housing that are here. Annapolis, 790. Outside of the city is only 292. Again, about a quarter of that.
Can I just say something really quickly, Christian? Frederick also does have the Interfaith Affordable Housing Program that operates outside of public housing. There's a number of units that are allocated to that program that is not based upon public housing inventory in the city of Frederick, so you would have to add those
And
to
our
that.
numbers, and the numbers I'm giving here don't include those other ones that we have of other organizations here in the city as well.
Right, I'm
So we
just,
have about a half a dozen pilots in the city, and I want to get to that in a second. Total number of Section 8 vouchers in Hagerstown is a little over 900, again, at this count. Again, 600 in Frederick, 380 in Annapolis, 400 in Rockville, 578 outside of the city. So in our county, we have twice as many in the city as we do just outside of the city limits. Subsidized housing units in the city, 675. Outside of the city in Washington County is 230. Cumberland, 590. Frederick, 670. Annapolis is the only item on that in our comparative communities where there's a single number, you know, on this sheet that is above that. And so when we speak to the notion of a partnership, I think that I come at it from the perspective of, number one, I hear the position that there's a need for this, but clearly the city of Hagerstown has provided within the construct of its community a significantly larger proportional share of meeting that need than any of our neighboring jurisdictions in the tri-state area and in our comparative 10 largest cities across this state.
And if
We're
we
clearly
were
doing that.
I think that the inventory versus the outcomes are two totally separate conversations. There's a large inventory of public housing in Washington County. There's also a large inventory of people continuing to wait for public housing because
right.
nobody is moving out of public housing because something like what we are proposing
In
to
what?
give people the opportunity to not only have a sustainable place to live, but a place to learn and grow is not happening. So you have people get into public housing, they get into Section 8, and they don't move forward from it. Our Section 8 wait list currently is 3 to 5 years long.
That's right.
That's
It has-
not because people are
it has
coming here for
thousands
it.
of people on it, especially on the public housing side, but nearly every other jurisdiction that has housing authorities across this state
Mm-hmm.
has managed that inventory by closing it periodically.
And ours had been closed until last year.
That's right, and the first time it had closed in like 20 years was back in March of 2015, when I brought the issue up that it had never been
And
closed.
we kept it closed for 3
And we built
years.
up to 5,300 individuals on the waiting list, some for more than a year at a time, that clearly, you know, that update of that availability had to expire, so to speak, you know, for a number of those individuals at that time. But getting to that point of public housing, you know, we sat in here over the course of the last 2 years, and we had a number of conversations about pilots. We have pilots that are coming up that are significant numbers of units within the city of Hagerstown. And so when we speak of, you know, what can we do to find a partnership, there's an example. So the pilots come up and you know, they're looking at new construction, or they're looking at renewal of the pilot, you know, to enter back into the federal programs to get the money to fix places up, and I get all that. But the pilot needle, so to speak, and what it pays, if you will, per unit, didn't move. And if it did, it moved so marginal as not to have an impact on our ability to provide that service. And here's an example. So those pilots range from about 10 to 15%, or about 10 to 15 cents on the dollar. So the average unit that would generally pay $800 a year in taxes, you know, the money that we need to manage to provide those services, ends up paying $80 or $100. And then you multiply that by 1,600 units across that gambit, and now we're getting about 10 to 15% of that money that we need to provide that service. And here we look at our budget, we're gonna do this here in the next couple of months, 80% of the property tax that we collect goes for two specific things, police and fire. And so there's that expectation of how do we provide that service to the degree folks expect within the budget parameters that we have. And if you were to tell me, hey, Chris, look, you know, we want to have a pilot for these next 200 units. If you could get everybody to agree to that pilot being something other than 15%, then that would be more palatable, you know what I mean, to the equation at our table to say, hey, okay, if that pilot can get to 30 or 40%, we can do it for 2,500 units. But now we're struggling at 1,600 units because the pilot is so small, but those pilots were created back in the 60s and 70s, you know, well before the construct of that cost equation that we have for public safety services now. And so there's an area where I think we could sit down, and then that gets us down to the next part of this vacant property. And one of the things that we found, I think we were all surprised by, was the fact that we have a significant number of folks, not just inside of the city, but outside of the city too, and more than a dozen hotels across this county. Let's be honest, there's tons of folks, you know, that are using that as temporary housing. But here inside of the city, I think it's 13% of our total housing inventory is sitting vacant. And then we hear reports from staff that say some of these properties sit vacant year after year after year. And so I said, hey, let's identify the ones that we own, just the ones we own right now that we haven't moved off the market. Let's get them into an entity's hand like the Housing Authority so that they can then fix them up, you know, be the receiver for those, waive the tax sale stuff and those things that the properties are behind, and try and get folks out of the temporary housing or using hotels as temporary housing and into these vacant properties that can be occupied. And if you were to tell me, hey, look, as a housing authority, we're gonna do a 40% pilot, then we have the capability at this table with the money that we have to manage for those services to say, you know what, we can do those individually. You know what I mean? We can fill more of those with individuals and get them out of the hotels and into that more permanent type housing that we're trying to achieve, if at the same time, at the end of the day, at this table, you know what I mean, it doesn't drastically further negatively impact the tax proceeds that we have to work with. Because the only other option we have then at this table to do is sit here and say, okay, we're either gonna cut services or we're gonna raise taxes. And somehow we've got to sort of reverse that effect of, you know, decline, then vacancy, then temporary placement, and a decline in the tax base and ability to do so. And, you know, one of the things I think that the mayor gave us, you know, a couple of weeks ago was the numbers of individuals incarcerated being placed, and you talk about the wraparound services. I mean, we're a city of 40,000 people, and then we see a report that says in the last 3 years, 1,200 individuals have been released from the prison system, placed into the community with a home plan. That's 400 new people in the city each year, or about a 1% population growth. We can't sustain that being the greater balance of our population growth and be able to sustain as well as stable tax base. The dynamics of it just simply
That is a
don't work.
viable workforce for you and for the community, those 400
For
people.
employers.
Right? That if they are coming, so one of the programs we run,
Mm-hmm.
right? We work specifically with people that are coming from incarceration on a regular basis. For them to find success, most of them are not ever gonna get into the public housing units because they're not gonna pass the background
Right.
check responsibility to get in there, right?
I'm aware.
So we're already kind of setting them up into a position where we're setting them up to fail because they don't have a stable place to live. If they're going through workforce training, if they were in an environment, again, I want to just highlight, we're not asking the city for any money to support any housing project. We're asking the city for ideas and collaboration. They were in an environment where you have your workforce programs, your case management, your education coming together in a place that they could afford to live, right, while they try to do those things. One of the things with a lot of the young people that I see, or adults that I see coming back from incarceration, is when they hit the street, there is an immediate need to make money to survive, right? But there's not immediate opportunity, or at least legit opportunity, to make money to survive. And so they are already in a situation where what that home plan might have been that they were released to could have been a boyfriend or a girlfriend that they met as a pen pal in prison who wants money as soon as you get out. You better start figuring out how you're gonna pay me rent. This is an alternative to that group jumping right into previous past bad behavior.
The
To be
reason-
clear, we're not asking to add to the public housing
No.
that's currently in place in Hagerstown. We're viewing this as like the 32 rental units that the Community Action Council has. We would acquire the property, we would do the renovations, and we would manage it. We pay rental tax on all of our properties. The only property we don't, obviously, is our office and our homeless shelter, but all of our rental properties, we pay property tax on, and this would be the same case.
The reason I keep going back to, and I agree with what Krista was saying, but I think we need to get the county involved in this tremendously, is because when you look at where's the concentration of housing, it's downtown. And if we had that many jobs available downtown for Ted, we would be, I mean, we'd be dancing a celebratory dance around here. We don't. And so we've got Ted crammed into a very small area with a whole bunch of other Teds, and they're now having to have this transportation problem to get out into the county to the areas where they can find work. So we need to move some of the assisted housing type of programs out to where the jobs are.
That's it. I think I hear that, and I don't disagree, Austin. The flip to it would be that most of your other, your medical provider, your mental health provider, your Department of Social Services, all of those things.
They need to
that
move
someone
out,
else
too.
may. Well, I don't know if I agree with that, but that they need to access your, there's not a concentration of doctor's offices.
I'm not being flippant about it, but it's, and the other thing is, we just had the meeting here, you know, we're talking about the Maryland Theater, we're talking about the transformation we're trying to make downtown. And we've got two disparate populations, and they're not really in concert with each other. So how do we deal with that? You know, are we going to keep throwing money on both programs in one area and have no success with either?
So part of my philosophy on that, and I will tell you, I grew up in downtown Frederick, and when downtown Frederick was, when I was there, it was very similar to downtown Hagerstown now. And one of the pieces that I saw, 'cause I was also lucky enough to be part of one of the larger nonprofits down there as it grew, was that less desirable population in the downtown area being invited to be part of the community downtown, not feeling that they were seen as a burden, right? That they were invited to come and go to the Weinberg. They were invited to be at the table when decisions were being, they might not have shown, but they were invited to participate. The providers that supported them, Way Station, places like that, the Community Action Agency, which was, you know, the soup kitchen was the place to be back in the day when I lived in downtown Frederick, were invited to be at the table to talk about how do we move downtown Frederick forward, knowing that, yes, some of these people might go out to the county, but the reality is that most of them probably will not, right? But if we invite them to be part of the community and we hold them accountable too for their part of being part of the community, there was a change in the culture in downtown Frederick. And I would hope that as a partnership and a collaboration, and we certainly want to involve the county as well, that we're able to do that with that same group. A lot of them did not come here from somewhere else for services. They grew up here. They've lived on Antietam Street their whole life. They've been in the South End since they were babies, and that's their home, right? And I wouldn't want somebody to tell me I can't be in my home because I'm poor. So, you know, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not saying that we need to say everybody live here, right? But I also think there's some opportunity for us to work together to make it a culture shift on both sides. And it's not just that they are now takers of services, they're givers as well. They're givers of their talents. There are things that they're able to do that we might not have ever even considered, right? That could be a benefit to downtown, not just a burden.
Brooke, in that model city that you were, you know.
In Indianapolis.
In Indianapolis, do you know what the city and county, what their role was in the program that you're talking about?
They developed an advisory council, right? So the city was involved, the county was involved, workforce development partners were involved, their local department, social services, some other places, created a council together to kind of like we're talking about here, right? To identify the problems and then identify the opportunities to address those problems as a group. And so that, this is my opinion too, right? We do come from our heart on our sleeves, right? We're nonprofits, that's who we are. But that's why we want the city to be involved, so that if we have an idea, right, that Goodwill would come and say, this is the greatest thing in the world, and their local municipality would say, no, 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 and then there'd be negotiations. It was a pretty significant period of time from concept to somebody getting their first set of keys, right? And we recognize that it needs to be a two-way street. So that was what they did and how they managed it.
But if it's working in other areas, then, I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you already have a model that's working.
Right, that's what I mean. I think that, you know, that's an easy, to create some kind of council. I mean, I think that doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but I think that there's certainly going to be different dynamics, you know, between every community and what that wheel looks
Sure.
like. I mean, for us, you know, I don't know how big that, you know, I don't know how big that city is, you know.
Indianapolis.
Or how big the county is, you know, what the percentage, I mean, we have a significant percentage of our rental housing stock, you know, occupied in various forms of subsidized and public, you know, housing. And so, you know, I don't know what that proportional share is, you know, what the volume of that.
I can share it with
that
the
task
council.
is.
I can share it. They have their kind of stats, and I can easily pull that up and share that with you.
Well, I do think it's definitely worth it to get a council like that together in order to come up with creative ideas to, you know, change the direction and the positivity and all the things that we're aiming for. So,
And ideally, there would be several locations in the city and the county. I mean, we're not saying that we want it concentrated downtown, but, you know, you also have to be respectful of this population. Not everyone has a car. You know, they rely on mass transit, so when the county commuter's not running, they can't get to where they need to be.
Well, if
So-
you're like Ted, you take a taxi. All right, I think what we should do is continue to have this conversation and with other partners, okay? Let's put together a timeline of when we want to get together with like some county reps and maybe a couple state reps, so that we can get their input and their buy-in. But yeah, I mean, it's,
I have an additional question.
sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Do you have an idea already as of space? I mean, I know we had looked at a space that is not working, but do you have any ideas of like a location or just like the groundwork that if we go to the county, we could say, here's this model in Indianapolis, it worked. Here's a potential of how we could do it in Washington County. You know, gain inputs, thoughts. Have you gotten that far or?
So here, right, yes, we haven't written it all out.
Okay, I
And
was
we
just
have
wondering.
looked at a couple of kind of different potential properties, but that was something else we wanted to bring to the council, is if there's an area that you feel would be best, that you said, this would be ideal from our perspective for something like this to be located here, we would be open to that as well, right? So we are, not hard and fast in anything right now. We wanted to come.
But you've
simply
identified
and say- I'm sorry?
you've identified some properties that could fit the need.
What property that's inventory that's for sale right now, so
Okay.
not that we were driving down the street and said it has to be that place. But we also know that, again, you have property that might make sense for us as well.
Well, I would hope in that analysis, and I've shared this before, you know, there are various census tracts around the city, you know, one of which has 78% of that census tract has some form of subsidized housing. There are census tracts within the city where it's 11% home ownership within that census tract. All I'm saying is, I would hope that we would, if we're going to head in that type of direction of dialogue, that we take into account those factors within those various parts of the community, you know, so that you know, that it doesn't add to those numbers. And I would also hope that we wouldn't take on these exercises simply for the sake of expanding offerings.
We're here now because we're open to all ideas, and we want to work
Oh, yeah.
as a collaborative group together.
And I'll tell you the same thing I told the Housing Authority when we talked about the 5 houses that we own and trying to get them off our plate and into their hands. You know, if there's a place within this city among this, I mean, we got a list of, you know, thousands of vacant properties. If there's some place that gets us, you know, that gets it back in productive hands and accomplishes that task of providing the opportunity for folks to move in with some permanency, you know, and address some of that temporary issues that we have, I'm all for that, you know, as long as there is that accountability, you know, through that partnership.
Absolutely.
I will say, pretty much every day for me, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys sitting at the table, I'm tagged on Facebook on something that has to do with helping out the homeless, providing jobs, providing a tiny home, giving people an opportunity and hope. They're doing it all over the country, and obviously our population wants to see those hope stories as well, because they're constantly tagging us. Why doesn't the city do this? Why doesn't Washington County do this? So I think as a community, if we can get that passion that people share behind a computer to come out and help us all and figure out ways to provide hope, I think we'll be doing a really good thing. So it's happening all over the country. We have a population that needs it. I think this conversation is good to have.
Well, I
Well, if we
wanna
have a
point-
creative idea, we can go to the state and say, look, we're gonna be a model for the rest of the communities. You need to get behind us, give us the funding, and we can.
Well, I do want to
move forward.
point out that the 1,204 individuals released from the local prisons that Kristen spoke about are not,
No, we wouldn't be seeking funding locally, so.
well, I'm just saying that they weren't from this community to begin with. They were released here on home plans from outside of our community where they committed their crime outside of the community, and then they became a burden to this community once released. which is why we are trying to change that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Although I used to work in the prison, it's also really, really not difficult to say, my home plan is Baltimore, and go back to Baltimore and request a modification to come back up here, and that happens quite frequently as well.
Yeah, well, there needs to be some coordination between parole and probation when it comes to that.
I don't disagree with you, I'm just sharing that that's just
understand.
another
Oh, I understand the
common
system, trust me.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's get together again. Let's,
Okay,
you guys
great.
put together some ideas, if you have some properties or something like that that you
Great,
have.
thank you.
Have an idea on. Thank you.
Thank you, we appreciate your time.
All right, preliminary agenda review. We're gonna blow through this, and stop me if you need to. Councilmember Keller will give the invocation next week, unless she has a problem with that, then I'll do it. Pledge of the flag, rules, procedures, all that kind of good stuff. Next scheduled meeting dates are Tuesday, April 2nd, 9th, and 16th, the work sessions at 4. The 23rd is the regular session at 7. There'll be no meeting on the 30th. Appointments would be appointments to the Board of Traffic and Parking, appointment to the Historic District Commission, and appointment to the Board of Zoning Appeals. We'll have citizen comments, public hearings on water and sewer rates, city administrator comments, mayor and council comments. We'll adopt the minutes of February 5th, 12th, 19th, and 26th. Under consent agenda, we'll have the fire department vehicle purchase, a fire marshal. The material will be presented, I suppose, next week. It's here? Okay, it's right here in front of us, all right. Department of Parks and Engineering, furnish ADA compliant bleachers for Parks and City Park. K Park Recreation Corporation, Janesville, Iowa, for $36,076.72. Repairs to the wall Marsh Run, CRG from Zelanda, PA, for $78,756. Hager's Crossing Drive, request to change the speed limit. Department of Planning and Code Administration, approval of procurement ratification, the demolition of 523 Summit Avenue. Utilities Department, light, substation testing and inspection services, electric power systems, Cockeysville, Maryland, for $49,485. Wastewater submersible grinder pump, Fluid Solutions Incorporated, Westminster, Maryland, $21,260. And from water, they're gonna buy a Ford F-250 from Keystone Ford in Denton, Maryland, for $27,877. Under unfinished business, approval of an ordinance to repeal Chapter 189, public utility license. Under new business, introduction of an ordinance, acquisition of 319 Summit Avenue, which we'll be discussing, Park Circle Service Center. Introduction of an ordinance, 2019 non-taxable bond issuance via private placement. Approval of resolution, acceptance of dedication offer for professional court. The approval of resolution, acceptance of dedication offer for Collegiate Acres. Approval of resolutions, 2019 summer play camps at the R.W. Johnson Community Center, the 2019 summer play camps at the Hagerstown YMCA, and the 2019 summer play camps at Girls Inc. Approval of resolution, marking parking lease for University District parking deck with the state of Maryland. Approval of resolution authorizing a Keep America Beautiful affiliation application. Approval of a Valley Co-op lease renewal. Approval of Appalachian Regional Commission projects. Approval of reallocating fiscal year 2019 balance of Invest Hagerstown grant programs. Approval of an open container exemptions for USMH, Maryland Theater, Hagerstown Hoops Pride, and Oktoberfest. Approval of a noise ordinance exemption for City Chapel. Consideration of Chief and Ganish III LLC request for water under the city's water and wastewater policy. Any questions on any of those issues? Fantastic. All right, moving along. Proposed strategy for cyclical tax sale properties, Scott. And John. Looks like we have video or something.
Good afternoon. Good discussion to have after the one that we just finished. We're We're back again to give you an update on where we are at as far as trying to find a process to deal with chronic tax sale properties. Just a brief refresher as to how the tax sale process works. It really begins in March when legal notices are sent to those that have not yet paid their tax bill. They have through March and through April to get current on their tax arrearage. On the first Friday of May, we relinquish all of those unpaid parcels to the county for them to continue on with the collection process. They have through the month of May, a parcel owner has through the month of May to make a payment to the county that we will get, obviously, those proceeds from, written by the county, a check by the county. If the arrearage remains unpaid, the parcel will go to tax sale the first Tuesday of June. If a parcel is acquired through tax sale, they go through a process that goes into a 2-year holding period. Basically, the bidder will have 2 years to foreclose on the property. Past history shows that of the 250 to 300 that we send a year to the county for tax sale, usually about half of those over a 2-year period will get foreclosed on, and a new owner will take over. The rest of those will eventually get back into that cycle of not paying taxes. Although if it's acquired at bid, we get that money up front, the bid price up front. We have, on average, 35 to 40 properties that get no bid. And basically what that means, nobody wants them. When that happens, those parcels remit back to us, and the process begins again. They get taxed, they get liened if they have abatements against them, trash, grass, debris. And the next tax sale year, when it goes unpaid again, we go through the same cyclical process. The problem we have had, and we have actually probably, I'd say 25 properties that have gone to tax sale repeatedly over the last several years. One parcel that is owned by a person that has now been deceased for how many years? 16 years? That it continually goes to tax sale and does not get purchased. The problem we have had over these last many years that John and I and Paul Folk have been trying to come up with a process on what can we do with these parcels. How do we get these parcels back on the tax roll? Has been legally, how do we do it? Counties have that ability. Municipalities have not had that ability until last year. The legislature did provide municipalities some options, such as they provided the vacant values program in Baltimore to be able to get these parcels back on the tax roll. The only issue then has become, how do we activate that process here in the city? John has worked feverishly on this for the last 6 months to a year, trying to work with other municipalities on how to do this, whether it be through community development, how do we transfer the deeds to make sure that, one, we get these back into a tax revenue producing situation, and two, we don't have a process where a owner that is still a viable entity can come back in and reacquire that property and not have to pay what they have owed over the past many years, and we do have those situations. So John can go through and talk through the process as he's been able to come up with it.
Just to start, we have a PowerPoint of 8 example properties that are in this current situation currently. Depending on the tax sale year and some of the tax laws, they'll kind of drop in and out of tax sale maybe every other year. And we've had many conversations with Todd Hershey over the last few years about this problem as well. But
who is as eager to help us
yes.
as we are eager to
Todd
help ourselves.
Todd has expressed unwavering support of something that helps eliminate these properties from this tax sale process. But the property here, 15 to 17 Elizabeth Street, it's been in the tax sale cycle since 2004. Vacant lot, I believe there was a code administration demolition back in the early 2000s. So here you have a scenario where the vacant lot has tax liens that far exceed the value of the lot. 572 to 574 Penmore Avenue, here's another unique situation where there was a structure at one time, a residential structure at one time in this alley. Now you would not be able to build a home in an alley, but the property was collapsing, another code enforcement demolition way back in the early 2000s. This has been in the tax sale cycle since 2005. So we'll get to this maybe a little bit later, but there's example properties like this in this tax sale situation where seemingly the only thing that makes sense is to try to find a way to maybe see if a contiguous property owner or an adjacent property owner would like to take that property on. And that's an example, once again, we'll get to a little bit later on. 10 to 12 Elizabeth Street, here is a structure that just continues to deteriorate year after year. This is where we have, and going back to Penmar, that owner is deceased. This is an owner who's still around, but once again, just not paid the taxes for many, many years, in the cycle since 2007. And this photo may be a tad dated, so I think it's showing there's 2016. I think the property continues to deteriorate and look worse if you would look at it now. Tax lien arrearage, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for many of these properties. So once again, that's what happens. They're up for a tax sale bid. Even if someone receives a bid, they maybe go out and then look at the property they bid on, they don't follow through. So that's an issue when some properties like this may receive a bid, it locks it into that tax sale cycle for 2 more years and nothing can happen. 242 and a half North Locust Street, a vacant property. 2010 is when it started in the tax sale cycle. It's the end unit, I think, of a 4 or 5 unit row home. 134 Clarkson Avenue in the tax sale cycle since 2006. Another property, a structure that was demolished years ago. I think the liens on this one are $50,000, $60,000. So once again, you have a lot that even the assessed value may be $5,000 or $10,000. That it just will never move through the current tax sale process. 661, 663 Pennsylvania Avenue in the tax sale cycle since 2008. Once again, an owner of record that we think is around and alive, but just they've basically walked away and abandoned the property. So been in the tax sale cycle for over 10 years. And the last example we have is just another vacant building, 126 Clarkson Avenue in the tax sale cycle since 2011.
Now, what you can see, obviously, with the location of these parcels, what they do to the neighborhood. If it's a vacant lot, and nothing can be built there, obviously a contiguous landowner may be the best thing to do. Deed it onto their land, start paying the 200 and some dollars worth of taxes in addition to what they pay for their current parcel. These structures, due to the fact that the liens on them just continue to add. You average, every time we have to put a lien or we have to send Public Works out to take care of an abatement, it's going to be between $80 and it could be $200, $300, depending on how much they have to do out there. Plus you add the admin fee and the tech fee, that's another $120. Those are what pile up. It's not so much the taxes, it's the liens on them and the amount of time and the staff it takes to go out and abate these properties. These structures, with some work, you know, there are plenty on this list that could be rehabbed if they're just, if we just made it a profitable transaction for somebody to go out and get them and want to do that work. Some of them, the only thing you could do is demolish because it just would not, you just could never rehab it enough to make it work for somebody. But in being able to clear out the liens and get these back into, even if you sold it, and we've talked before about this, sold it for $1, get it back on the tax roll, begin taking that revenue back again, get it to somebody like, perfect situation like you just talked about, being able to work with a third-party entity that's gonna go in and be a great parcel for them to take over, single family, multifamily, depending on what the structure is.
Some of those entities, I mean, the housing authorities case, some of those entities are going to have greater access to federal capital for
Absolutely.
that type of purpose.
The problem is-
Private investors just aren't going to see the benefit of it.
No, and the issue is, and what John's gonna tell you about, is the process of, if you wipe the liens and send them to tax sale, and, you know, you've gone from a minimum bid of $8,000 to a minimum bid of $400, what's gonna happen to that, is the previous owner gonna come back in and take it, because now they've just basically had all their receivable taken away? Is it gonna be one of these clearing houses that come in and just scarf up tens of properties every time there's a tax sale, that most of those end up being stuck for 2 years?
They're just
And
bidding to gain the interest
they're-
on hopefully
to
getting
get-
the taxes.
They're hedging them in limbo.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Exactly.
exactly right.
So-
And yet we continue to accumulate the liens and all the labor costs associated with it. So what is the way that we can protect ourselves the most, while not being confined to the point where we have to buy that parcel and we're stuck with it? We don't want that to happen. But yet we've got to find a way to move.
Can you define the term buy, though? Because in my mind, like, I'm hearing, let's just take a property that's, let's say they're 30 grand in on a tax lien. In my mind, what I hear you saying is you create a process where you assume ownership of that property.
It would be
right?
through foreclosure.
Through foreclosure, but the money you owe, so to speak, to acquire that property is money that's largely being levied by local government against it.
Right.
So you just waive yours.
Buy's not a good word. Acquire would
Okay.
be, yeah, acquire would be the better way, to where we don't want to start, we don't want as a municipality to start inventorying tax sale parcels.
Inventory meaning owning them?
Long-term.
Long-term, over a long-term period.
Yeah, for me, you acquire them, you have that third party in place.
Yep.
You have a 12-month turnaround, or you tear them down.
There you go.
Once that 12 months is up.
That's similar to the Dorchester County approach. It was one of the few jurisdictions that actually had a program that was set up to combat these issues. Obviously, a little different, since Dorchester County is the entity that conducts the tax sale, similar to our jurisdiction, Washington County. They conduct the tax sale, but they do intervene. They foreclose on these problem tax sale properties, and over history, what had started in roughly 2015. I should give credit to Cindy Smith, who's with Dorchester County, who oversees this program, and she said they've modified it over the last few years as they've learned some things, and as state legislation has changed. But they've moved approximately 200 properties from this dead cyclical cycle into productive use. They gain ownership through tax sale foreclosure. Some scenarios it would be more applicable to the city of Hagerstown. They allow Cambridge, and she mentioned some other jurisdictions, they would gain ownership through tax sale foreclosure. And they have a very elaborate process set up to where they have different steps then to dispose of the property. They're not gaining the properties to try to collect inventory, but I do think they've taken an approach where they look at maybe 30 properties a year that they just gather in through this system, and then they try to resell them. What we would propose is looking at something similar, especially to start maybe on a pilot basis, and as we said in the memo, to try to pre-identify or identify and maybe have a scenario where we have a pre-agreement with an end user or partner to say, hey, we have some properties that the city could likely acquire through tax sale foreclosure, and then we have maybe a pre-agreement set up to then gain ownership. Then we take care of what we can do for the lien scenario. We would work with the county. The county mostly has smaller lien amounts on these properties in question. Once again, it's mostly
Because they don't
city.
come in
It's
and
their
maintain
tax
them, right. yeah.
Correct. It's mostly the city's tax lien. So as Dorchester County said, you have to understand, we're not going to recoup this money in most scenarios, and we're not going to recoup it anyway right now with just letting the cycle continue. It's just going to continue to add tax liens. So then you would ultimately then flip the property for maybe a developer end user if there is an amount that they'd be willing to pay depending on the condition of the property, or once again, if it's an undevelopable lot, that you would try to seek a contiguous property owner to say, here's the property for $1, they then maintain it, it's back on the tax rolls, and it's productive. So there would be a lot of details that we have to work out, and I think ultimately what we were trying to find was an approach that would avoid us having to get into the tax sale foreclosure business. But at this point, that's the best method we're seeing. with, once again, a program already up and running that's aligning with state laws. A lot of the state laws regarding these types of problems always were conducive to Baltimore City, and a lot of the legislation passed in the recent years has now given the same privileges Baltimore City had to local jurisdictions. So the concept we're proposing would be very similar to Dorchester County. The goal, though, would be to try to maybe identify end user, developer, partner in the forefront before we execute any type of foreclosure, thus avoiding the city then just collecting properties and building inventory, because that's not our goal. And I think the other thing to highlight here, these are the types of properties we're focused on. Sometimes there's concern where maybe we're trying to get into the business where there's actually still a homeowner in a home that's in arrears. That would not be the case. I believe the state legislation clearly says they need to be vacant and abandoned properties, and that's the focus here.
What about funding for demolition? Where is that gonna come from?
What we could look at is, in certain scenarios, you do have some restrictions, but there would definitely be some block grant funding depending on when HUD ever announces our grant amount for the next fiscal year. There could be some funding we could budget for fiscal year 20 for these types of demolitions. The key would be finding maybe, once again, that end user who would look at maybe a new use on the lot, such as a habitat. We've had these conversations just to gauge interest from other partners such as Habitat, H&DP, Chief, CAC, trying to think of others, Interfaith Housing. Those types of entities, some of those entities, their work in building homes would actually meet CDBG regulations. If the city would maybe have a property where we would acquire through tax sale foreclosure, we could demo it right away with CDBG funds and then ultimately transition it to a partner who could build homes. And that's one of Dorchester County's steps, is they look for nonprofits that will take these properties on and either build a home or maybe rehab the home for home ownership. They specifically have that in their guidelines.
Is there any waiting period if we were to acquire these properties?
That's part of the legislation that's going through Annapolis now, is that it looks like that. Expedite, instead of a 2-year period, it'd be a 6-month period to at least give some sort of due diligence for an owner that may be out there to want to try to reclaim it. And a couple other points would be that we would not be stuck into the cyclical tax sale process. We could go to the county potentially and basically do an over-the-counter acquisition at any time during the year, as long as we had a prospective buyer and we had that in place. The second thing would be is we would want to ensure that the acquirer would continue to have this as a taxable property, because what we don't want to do is take something that we're not getting the revenue from now and then have it turned around and still not be able to get the revenue. Now, the only positive to that is if it was rehabbed or if there was a structure built on that property, it would affect the neighborhood's assessment and potentially start boosting up neighbors, where, a situation like this, if you're next door, well, not in this case, but if you're in that general neighborhood, it's an anchor on your assessment.
The 400
Which
block
for an
Pennsylvania
owner is
Avenue,
fine.
perfect
because-
example.
Yeah, an owner is fine, because that's gonna be the less amount of taxes they pay. For a municipality, it's not a good situation, so.
Well, I think that, when you ask about the demolition funding, I think we put funding in the general fund budget this year for demolition. And I go back to this notion, and I feel like we've had this conversation for a long time. Now, if you told me as a property owner, a homeowner in Hagerstown, look, I'm gonna set aside $250,000 a year in the budget, it's gonna be for demolition. We're gonna demolish these structures that everybody knows, everybody sees, but we're going to actually now, take an aggressive approach toward this. And we're gonna set aside this penny of the budget of the year to do it. And Mr. Homeowner, it's gonna cost you, $12 a year. I mean, that's what a penny on the tax rate is, it's $12. I mean, if somebody told me that, hey, Chris, I need $12 from you a year in tax money, but I'm gonna get rid of all these pieces of garbage that are around the city, I would be into it right away. I mean, I just think it's that simple that you look at it and it's 30 this year and 20 the next year, and I mean, that's the only way to do it. And I have no fear about us acquiring these properties, because I think that you guys will have the complete competence to move them either into the adjoining property owner, into responsible landlord's hands, or into a third party, conglomerate that creates a CDC type entity. a community development corporation entity out of it. I don't have any fear that'll happen. They just need the mechanism for us as the government to start getting them. And I think the better buy is to get them in that bulk nature.
Right, right. And
what's the
now we
next
have a
step then?
process for that.
Our
What's the
next
next
steps
step?
would be to start to formalize a program with guidelines, and once again, our mindset was, this is new, and there would be some unknowns, and we just don't want to dive in headfirst, not knowing how to swim, and have 15 properties in all of a sudden in our inventory. The goal would be we know there's certain properties where structures, rehab's feasible, but nobody's ever going to acquire them right now with $70,000 of tax liens. But if we're able to get them out of that cycle and into a partner's hands, a developer's hands, they could once again be productive properties back on the tax rolls. So that is our goal. Next steps, formalize guidelines, come back to the mayor and city council for approval of those guidelines, and then begin to look at maybe 1, 2, 3 properties sometime this summer on a pilot basis. And I think we're going to learn some things through the process, doing it once or twice, and that's what Dorchester County did. They tweak the process each year they've done it, and I think state legislators are well aware of the issue as well, as I think there's even more legislation up this year again for items that are related to this process. But that's our next steps.
It's great to know that, based upon the previous conversation, that we already have a conversation started with a couple entities that may be interested in working with the city to take some, because there are definitely some of these properties that are chronic tax sale parcels that I think would fit into criteria that they might be able to do something.
And did you have the county's buy-in to waive their fees?
We don't have that officially.
We have Todd Hershey's.
I think Todd is more than willing to advocate for that, and once again, with the minimal amount of
They're not getting
county
anything.
tax.
They're not getting
Exactly.
No,
I-
I'm not gonna get anything.
We,
Yeah, the same thing.
Scott and I have had multiple conversations over this, and we think it's just a no-brainer at this
It is.
point.
It is a no-brainer. You're right.
Because status quo is not doing anyone any good.
Sounds good.
I really like the idea of pre-identifying and vetting the developers for this, so it doesn't cycle back around and turn into another situation where we have 2 years to wait.
Right.
All right, thank you, guys.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll be back in coming weeks. Thank you.
Property acquisition, 319 Summit Avenue.
Yes, good job, Ron. Great presentation.
One of my best. Afternoon. We have reached agreement with the owner of the 319 Summit property. The business closed in December, and the widow of the gentleman that ran the business, she's moving to Virginia, so she's ready to sell it. So on the second page, I put together a quick budget of what we would see as how we would proceed going forward. For expenses, the acquisition cost would be $135,000. We would highly recommend we do a environmental survey because it was an Exxon station, so we want to ensure that the site is environmentally clean. The building demolition, we're assuming that you want to take the building down. There's some other possible uses we've talked about, but I'm basing the budget on this, taking the building down, tearing up the parking lot, and making it into a green space. We can discuss that. And then I needed some money for just grading and planning and landscaping. That's $25,000. Of the funding, $105,000 will come from program open space. Virtually certain we'll get all that money. And the agreement with her is contingent upon us getting that money. $12,000 from the general fund contingency, $50,000 from future bond issue, which you talked about last week with Michelle, $25,000 from the proposed, it will be in the proposed CIP 140 in the budget that you receive here at the end of the month, and then $10,500 from the CIP fund balance. If you want to move forward with this, we just ask that you would approve the ordinance, introduce it next week, approve it on the 2nd. We'll do the environmental study. Everybody will sign the agreement, and potentially the POS money will be available in August, and we would do the demolition and clean the site up this fall.
What do you envision being in the phase 1 and 2 environmental survey? I mean, you're doing that because you believe there may be tanks under the ground?
We know there were some tanks there. We know some of them were removed, but that's one thing we'd want to look for. We'd want to look for asbestos flooring tile. We'd want to look where they disposed of their waste oil when they changed things like that. Any other tanks that they may have had for heat or anything like that.
We good?
Yes, sir.
And then all of a sudden, we found $202,500.
5,000, actually. POS gave us.
Oh, found 105.
Yes, sir, thank you.
All right, thank you, Rodney.
All right, thank you.
City administrative comments?
Just two administrative efforts on ours. Washington County Maryland Municipal League meeting is Monday night, and Tuesday afternoon, the State of the Library luncheon. Thank you.
Shelley?
No, no, sir.
Lou? Austin?
Nothing.
Chris?
One thing, just wanted to thank staff. I see on the agenda is the 523 Summit Avenue. I know that we've been sort of harping on that house for a number of years now. I just wanted to thank you for pursuing that process, and I'm sure that the South End community thanks you in its pending demise, that house be demolished, and it will immediately improve the condition of that neighborhood.
When's it coming down?
April 1 is the contract start date.
Cool.
Don't play a joke.
Yeah.
Is there really kind of that?
Yeah, there should be, huh? Maybe we could each just
Every
have
one
a
of
sledgehammer and take a whack at it.
Groundbreaking, I don't know, something.
Yeah. I don't have anything either. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again next week.